Thanks for joining us for CBN News Today. I'm Heather Sells.
And I'm Mark Martin. The controversy over President Obama's executive order on immigration hit Capitol Hill Tuesday. Emotions ran high during a congressional hearing on the topic. CBN's David Brody has the blow-by-blow account.
It may be December, but 4th of July fireworks were on display inside the House Judiciary Committee hearing room on Tuesday. Protesters interrupted the hearing several times as immigration reform supporters demanded action from Congress. But this hearing wasn't about possible policy moves on immigration. It was about whether President Obama abused his constitutional authority when he signed his executive order that allowed 5 million illegal aliens to stay in the country rather than be deported, and to qualify for some government benefits as well. Congressional Republicans say the president went too far because only Congress can change federal immigration law.
President Obama has just announced one of the biggest constitutional power grabs ever by a president. He has declared unilaterally that by his own estimation, almost 5 million unlawful immigrants will be free from the legal consequences of their lawless actions.
Republicans argue that the president even admits he can't do what he did. They tried to prove it with a video showing all the times that he admitted he couldn't change the law. And even after he passed his executive order, he said this:
I just took an action to change the law.
Jay Sekulow, chief counsel for the American Center for Law and Justice, believes the president's own words say it all.
He changed the law. Presidents cannot change the law. He can't do so constitutionally. He cannot do so under Supreme Court precedent. He can't change the law to comport with his preferred public policy.
Democrats on the committee pushed back, saying that the president is in his legal rights to use what's known as prosecutorial discretion, meaning that the president, like a prosecutor, can decide which crimes to prosecute and which laws to enforce. Republicans disagree. They say that stretches the idea of prosecutorial discretion far beyond its real meaning. They argue it doesn't apply to enforcing immigration laws that are passed by Congress. Democrats say it wouldn't have come to this if Republicans had passed immigration reform.
I defy any of my colleagues on this committee or anyone in Congress to tell me our immigration system is not broken. We know that it is. But I am disappointed that this Congress, like a number of them before it, has done nothing to fix the problem.
But despite Democrats trying to make the hearing about Republicans and immigration, witnesses on the panel pointed out the larger issue of how President Obama's executive action is going down a very treacherous road and that he could be setting a dangerous precedent.
The president's executive power does not give him the power to govern by decree. It does not give him the power to suspend the law. If he can actually do this and get away with it, I guess future presidents could say that they're going to suspend more parts of the Affordable Care Act. Maybe they'll suspend it all. You know, why? We don't need a Congress to repeal it. We just need a president to say, I suspend it.
Sekulow says the president has made congressional action on immigration reform even more difficult to accomplish because the president has now made the argument about his actions rather than what to do about the immigration system.
My ultimate concern here is that the president's utilization of executive action has set back the debate on real immigration reform probably a couple of years because what it did, we're arguing procedure rather than substance.
Republicans are trying to figure out their next move now that the president is moving forward on his executive order. Speaker of the House John Boehner says the House will vote this week to undo his executive order. But at this point, it's just legislative window dressing because the president would, of course, veto any sort of bill like that. So where does it leave everyone? Well, it's a political chess game between Republicans and Democrats over a very volatile and emotional issue. David Brody, CBN News, Washington.
Well, President Obama has reportedly picked a nominee to replace the outgoing Defense Secretary, Chuck Hagel. A top Senate Republican says he has been told the president will nominate Ashton Carter. Carter has never served in the military or in Congress, unlike many defense secretaries before him. But he did serve under Hagel as the number 2 man at the Pentagon. The Pentagon transition comes as the U.S. faces difficult decisions about fighting the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. Carter is well respected at the Pentagon, and he has support from Republicans.
The city of Detroit found itself in the dark for several hours after a widespread power outage Tuesday. The blackout affected thousands of people. The cause is still under investigation, but city leaders say Detroit's aging infrastructure is to blame. Courtroom video of a murder trial shows the moment the lights went out in Detroit. There's a long flicker, and then the massive power outage brought downtown Detroit to a standstill. It cut power to 1,400 buildings, resulting in people trapped in elevators and emergency evacuations. Firefighters helped the elderly and disabled.
They carried people down several flights of stairs.
There's essentially a sense of eeriness here downtown.
The power outage plunged schools throughout the city into darkness, including Wayne State University. Police and fire stations were also in the dark, while prisoners at the main jail were forced into lockdown.
When the power went out, we lost power to all of our stations.
Traffic light outages affected almost the entire city, causing gridlock. Detroit's public lighting department says 2 cable failures are to blame for knocking out the entire grid.
We're not certain what happened to the cable. That's something that we'll have to investigate. Certainly, I'm sure it's age-related.
In financially troubled Detroit, an aging infrastructure has been a concern for years.
We will, for another few years, still at least have some risk of this happening.
The power outage also is a reminder that the older American power grid could be vulnerable to terrorism.
It's an ongoing battle to stay one step ahead of these folks who might want to do us some harm, not just physical harm to the power system, but also the cyber side.
The positive side in Detroit is the system that went down only affects public buildings. The rest of the city remained untouched. Detroit's mayor says the power grid has not been updated in decades. The city is emerging from the largest municipal bankruptcy in U.S. history.
A deadly bombing in the capital of Yemen today. At least 2 people were killed by a massive explosion that took place near the home of the Iranian ambassador. Eyewitnesses report a car loaded with explosives pulled up next to the house and then detonated. Iran's new ambassador to Yemen just arrived in the city last week. Iranian officials say the ambassador was unharmed.
The Somalia-based al-Shabaab terrorist group is claiming responsibility for the massacre of 36 quarry workers in Kenya. The attack happened Tuesday in Nairobi. The Islamic group al-Shabaab is affiliated with al-Qaeda. Officials say the terrorists singled out the non-Muslim workers, asking them to recite the Islamic creed before they were murdered. Most of the victims were Christians. Some were beheaded. Others were shot in the back of the head. CBN News spoke to Halton Lugalia from Christ is the Answer Ministries in Nairobi. He explained what was likely behind the attack.
On their Twitter account, they are still say that they will continue doing this, and they are doing this because Kenyan soldiers are in Somalia. So until the Kenyan government will be able to remove their soldiers from Somalia, they will continue to do this. Unfortunately for us Christians, we look at it as a targeted killings.
The mass killing comes 10 days after an attack on a bus where 28 people were killed.
A South African doctor is still going to work at a hospital in the same town where her husband and children were killed less than a week ago. Saturday, Taliban gunmen stormed a Foreign Office building, killing NGO aid worker Werner Grunwald and his 2 children. Grunwald was a former pastor from South Africa. His wife, Hannah Lee, is still working at a hospital in Kabul. 2 others were killed and several others were hurt in the attack.
Israel is facing a surprise early election after the breakup of the Israeli government. That comes after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu fired 2 of his government ministers who led separate parties. CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl explains.
In a televised address, Netanyahu accused 2 of his ministers of staging a government takeover. He told Israelis he couldn't run a government that was criticizing him and his policies.
I will not tolerate an opposition within the government anymore. I will not tolerate ministers attacking government policy from within the government, attacking its leader, motivated by political interests, and being irresponsible at a national level.
How to deal with growing Palestinian terrorism, building in Jerusalem, increasing concern over Iran's nuclear development, And a law to enshrine Israel's Jewish character created divisions within the government. Israelis will vote in elections in mid-March, 2 years ahead of schedule. TV opinion polls show the country veering to the right and bolstering Netanyahu's Likud party. But a lot could happen in the next 3 months. In Brussels, Secretary of State John Kerry declined to comment on internal Israeli politics.
We hope that whatever government is formed can negotiate and move towards resolving the differences between Israelis and Palestinians.
For now, Israel will plunge into a costly election campaign that may not bring the country any closer to solving the issues it's facing. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Today, the world remembers the life and legacy of Dr. Miles Monroe and his wife, Ruth Ann. A memorial service happens today at the Bahamas Faith Ministries Diplomat Center. Tomorrow, a state-recognized funeral will take place at a sports complex in Nassau. The National Memorial is expected to attract people from around the world and will feature a number of tributes and special music performances. The Monroes were killed in a jet crash November 9th. For more information on the memorial services and ways that you can pay tribute to the Monroes, log on to cbnnews.com.
Coming up, the battle over marriage in America. Some are saying the church should re-examine its role. A few weeks ago, we told you about the Florida ministry that faced legal action for feeding the homeless. Now a Florida judge has temporarily suspended Fort Lauderdale's ban. The city ordinance aimed at keeping people from feeding the homeless in parks and other public places has generated nationwide controversy, especially after Arnold Abbott, a 90-year-old homeless advocate, was arrested for repeatedly defying it. The judge suspended enforcement of the ordinance for 30 days and ordered mediation on the issue. City attorneys indicated they may appeal the ruling.
A new survey and an online pledge drive show support for a movement to further separate church and state roles in marriage. 6 in 10 people responding to the Lifeway Research Survey said the government should not define or regulate marriage. More than a third also said that clergy should get out of the civil marriage business, and a quarter of pastors themselves agreed. Meanwhile, hundreds of pastors are signing an online pledge saying they will no longer sign marriage licenses. And joining us now with more on the survey and the movement to separate Christian marriage from civil marriage is Ed Stetzer, the executive director of Lifeway Research. Ed, we have had pastors signing marriage licenses for a long time, and now a third of Americans and a quarter of pastors say let's not. What do you see is going on here?
Well, I will say that I was surprised by how high that number was. I think there's been a recent call for a pledge not to do such marriages, and it didn't have hundreds or thousands, I should say. It had a few hundred signatures. So I think that there is a sense for many people, there's an ambivalence on the secular side. They just don't think the church should be involved in the engagement of state issues like marriage. But I think perhaps there's a growing interest. Now I say perhaps because we can't tell from one poll. Perhaps there's a growing interest in Christians kind of separating themselves and having Christian or church weddings separate from state weddings, which is actually the way it's already done in a lot of the world.
Right. Interesting that the U.S. is separate in that way. Now, your survey found, of course, that pastors are a little less likely to want to get out of the civil marriage business, while at the same time, hundreds of pastors are signing an online pledge to do just that. What is your take on what's going on with pastors?
Yeah, I think that pastors right now, they do say, by the power vested in me by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. That's the last wedding I did was in Pennsylvania. But that phrase is really fascinating. It is by the power vested in me by the state or the Commonwealth. And so every time they say that they're making a statement about the state's power to regulate marriage. So I think you're finding some saying maybe that's not such a great idea. Maybe as the definition of marriage changes, maybe they're asking, perhaps we need to say this is a distinct function. I don't think, however, that's a widespread view. I mean, as you saw, the numbers were actually the vast majority said, no, we still should be connected, the church and the state connected on this marriage question. But to me, it's the surprising size of the minority that caught my attention.
Right. And critics of this pledge worry, of course, that the church is retreating from the culture if it steps out of the civil marriage business. Do you see it that way?
I don't know. What I would say is, as we look at the numbers, I would say that the vast majority of pastors don't want to move away on this issue, don't want to separate their functions. They still want to say by the power vested in me by the state. So is that a growing phenomenon? Is there going to be a shift or retreat? I think that's the debate right now. The debate is, should we take a stand? Should we be apart? And I think those questions are going to be debated probably in the years to come as marriage is being debated, reconsidered, and even redefined. What we find here is the vast majority of pastors think they still should be, but a surprising minority to me of Americans and pastors think perhaps they shouldn't be involved in this definition at all.
All right. Any thoughts on where this is all headed? Do you think more in the church will want a separation of these two concepts of marriage?
It's a good question. It's a very hard question to ask on a survey. So we asked it multiple different directions. I don't know. We're going to track it. We're going to ask these questions again. I wouldn't be surprised that as society becomes more secular, that people will want to reflect more secular societies, like, for example, in France, where there's really no connection between what you do at the courthouse and what you do at the church related to marriage.
Really interesting. Ed Stetzer with Lifeway Research, thanks so much for your time.
Up next, scientists who can tell you how you think by looking at your fingertips. Hear more about this groundbreaking research.
The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention say the benefits from circumcision greatly outweigh the risks. The CDC has released a new draft of guidelines on the procedure, and they state that circumcision can lower the risk of sexually transmitted diseases, penile cancer, and urinary tract infections for men. The CDC will receive public comment for 45 days before finalizing the guidelines. The circumcision rate has dropped in the U.S. in recent years. The CDC estimates it's around 58% right now.
Too much sugar could be bad for your brain and your memory, especially for teenagers. A recent study from the University of Southern California found sugar led to problems with memory and inflammation of the brain in juvenile rats. One of the researchers said the brain is especially vulnerable to influences from food when it's developing, like during teen and adolescent years. And he added a diet high in sugar can not only mean gaining weight, but could hurt your brain as well.
Well, what if a simple test could predict what areas your child will excel in from the day that he or she is born? It sounds like science fiction, right?
Yeah, except that one doctor has developed such a test. And as Angela Zatopek explains, it all starts with the fingertips.
As we all know, every person's fingerprints are unique. And one expert I recently spoke to said that you can learn a lot about how someone's brain functions just by studying those prints. What if you were given a blueprint of your mind, a map showing how you learn and where you might excel? Based on Harvard professor Howard Gardner's research in the theory of multiple intelligence, developers formed a testing system called the Innate Intellect Evaluation.
Here's how the process works. I capture your fingerprints. Within 24 to 36 hours, I have a 36-page report that not only identifies the 8 intellects identified by Dr. Howard Gardner, but also gives you exactly how that person processes. How do they take in information? Do they do it visually, auditorily, or kinesthetically?
This type of testing can also be a tool for parents to use by understanding how your child learns and what environments they flourish in. Then you can take that information and identify areas that might need extra attention or where the child excels. Here are just a few of those areas. Logical mathematical learners use categorizing and think about things in patterns, relationships, and numbers. Musical rhythmic learners use rhythm or melody, especially by singing or listening to music while learning. Our unique designs in our fingers are connected to specific lobes of the brain, determining how we learn and process information.
God made a mimeograph, a copy, a ditto. Each one of these prints on your finger is the exact map of the brain lobe that it's connected to. 5 fingers, 5 lobes.
With curiosity getting the best of me, I wanted to see exactly how my brain works and my learning style.
So Angela, great news. We got your report back. Our scientists sped it up. The bad news, it's much worse than we thought. Your visual lobes are off the chart. how things look, colors, does it match? And then also the other side, visual identification, visual differentiation, observing things. Does this match? Does this fit? Is this right? Something doesn't look right here. You are gifted in both of those areas.
Currently, 2.4 million students are diagnosed with a learning disability. That makes up 41% of our student population. Through this new testing, Black says if you understand how the brain works, you can then remove the learning disability and simply find what is the child's learning style.
Think about our education system. You know we're falling behind. We're falling behind the math, the sciences, all that. So what are we doing wrong? The rest of the world is teaching the way people learn. We're working to get people out of the old way of thinking.
The testing results show 8 different learning styles that you can possess. For more information on those or how to get the testing, visit cbnnews.com. I'm Angela Zatopek, CBN News.
Finally on our program, last night in Washington, it was time to light the Capitol Christmas tree.
This year, it's an 88-foot spruce beauty from Minnesota's Chippewa National Forest. House Speaker John Boehner presided over the festivities and reminded everyone that Christmas is a time to rediscover, quote, the glory of God's love. And he spoke about the first Christmas when an angel announced the birth of a Savior, Christ the Lord. 10-year-old Aaron Urban, a brain cancer patient, helped to light the tree.
3, 2, 1.
A beautiful tree indeed. And on Thursday, the national Christmas tree at the White House will be lit. And I thought it was great that Boehner really talked about Christ and what Christmas is all about.
I love that. I love it when the true meaning of Christmas is spoken boldly.
Actually came out, yeah.
Yes. Well, that's it for now on CBN News Today. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com.
And tell us what you think about the stories you've seen here. You can do that on Facebook or at CBN News on Twitter. Have a great day.